Hi, welcome to Module 1. This is my first go round at a online course and doing these video recordings, so I'm hoping I'll get better at it. I'm a little nervous about it. I have a few notes, so I might look down a little bit once in a while, but I just wanted to say a few things by way of introduction to Module 1. You will notice probably after looking at the syllabus that for Module 1 you have a little bit of extra time. I gave a few days extra, partially because classes start on Tuesday, which I guess you could say is almost the middle of the week. And since it was the first week, we'll have almost 2 weeks to do the first module. And then after that, most weeks we'll do a module in 1 week, and the amount of work will be about the same. So you'll just have a little bit of extra time for this first one. So hopefully that's helpful getting things rolling for the course. So just by way of introduction for this course, really the topic is ethics in sports. It's pretty straightforward. In my view, I think my main goal for this course is really to just kind of take a broad look at ethics in sports and from a Christian perspective, how does that shape how we view ethics? What types of things can we apply to our jobs and our environment, and really ultimately, how does our faith affect our ethics, and how does that make us different as Christians? Ethics is definitely a very significant aspect of sports. I know, I've been thinking about this a little bit, but for myself, growing up playing sports, being interested in being a coach, I didn't really think a lot about ethics and what role that would play in playing sports in my job as a coach. But over the years, I've really come to understand that ethics is a very significant part of sports. And we're gonna look this semester at some of the reasons why and some of the ways that happens in theories behind that. And in our reading for this week, that's kind of what the readings get at, is kind of those basics. What are some of the theories behind morality and ethics, and how that affects sports. We live in a culture that has really embraced relativism, and I think that is largely because our culture has become very secular. So, I was raised in a Christian environment, and in that environment, there was always a really strong emphasis on morality. So I'm a pretty black and white person. And as I was reading through the introduction, the thing that really occurred to me is, if you don't have that basis, how is right or good defined? And, as I read through that intro, there were multiple times in which I thought about that, because the author talks about these theories and about the individual and how the individual needs to decide, what the right choice is. But when you don't have a common and shared basis for that, it can become very complicated. Even when we have that basis, I think it's oftentimes very difficult to still apply our ethics and to know how to make the right choices and the good choices in a biblical way, that can be difficult. So if you have no basis and a relativistic viewpoint, to me, that makes it even more difficult. So that kind of shapes, the way I look at it and the way the place where I'm coming from. And my assumption is that many of you have a similar background, and maybe some of you wouldn't agree with me as much on those things either. But those are some good things that we can discuss as we go through this semester. As far as the introduction goes, the introductory chapter in the textbook, I felt that it was a little bit difficult reading. It's definitely got a lot of terminology and just the way that it's written, not super easy to follow. For myself, I felt like I just had to kind of slog through it a little bit, but I do think it's valuable for you to do that. I understand because I'm probably pretty similar to most of you, that most people who are interested in sports and athletics are not philosophers. And this is a very philosophical introduction, but it's helpful, I think, to understand, where these philosophies are coming from. And really, when you have a secular worldview, what types of arguments are made for why we should have ethics and morality, and all of that. So it's pretty helpful in that sense. Chapter 13, the Russell chapter, I really enjoyed reading that chapter, and I think for most of you, you'll probably enjoy that one a lot more than the introduction. Like I said before, I'm a pretty black and white person, but in spite of that, I felt like Russell made some very good arguments, especially when he talked about shenanigans and how, having things like gamesmanship and shenanigans in sports is a way in which we keep it from being too serious, and we keep that play aspect. And I really liked the way he argued that. He was convincing to me. But in the end, I still couldn't really fully embrace it because, I go back to really my roots, I think, where I feel like things still can be pretty black and white. And there's certain things, I think, as a Christian coach that maybe other coaches think are acceptable that I'm not really that comfortable with. And maybe there's other things that I am, and maybe I'm not consistent in that regard. But one of the things that really popped into my mind was, this story that I heard earlier in the summer about a golfer from Sioux Falls Christian who was disqualified at the state golf meet because she made a mistake on her scorecard, and then after turning it in, realized the mistake, and then she went to the referee, or whatever you call it in golf, and turned in a revised card, and as a result, she was disqualified because that's what the rules are. And apparently in golf, they're really black and white. I didn't really realize this. I'm not much of a golfer, so you golf people are probably more familiar with that than I am. But yeah, I thought, why do we accept the gamesmanship and the shenanigans and all of that kind of stuff in many sports? And yeah, you can make the argument, I think, and I think Russell does very well, that helps us keep an aspect of play and interest. It makes the sport more interesting. But then why in another sport like golf are we so black and white? And there's no room for any kind of fudging or changing of the rules. It just doesn't seem super consistent to me. And so that's something that I really got from that chapter, that yeah, I can see a lot of those arguments, but yet I'm still conflicted because I see where in sports we're not really consistent with that. So that's something to think about. And, I'm going to post a few questions on the discussion board where we might discuss that a little bit. I'm definitely interested to hear your thoughts and what you might think about those types of things. And I also put a link on the module 1 to the article about the Sioux Falls Christian golfer in case you're not familiar with that story, because you might want to read it just to understand what I'm talking about. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea about some of the things in this chapter that we're trying to get at. And I encourage you to get into the reading as soon as you can this week and kind of get into a rhythm there. And then the next week we'll have a little less time to do it, but it will be basically the same format.